in our town. It started at the top of the hill and came down through the graveyard and ended at the old lighthouse. This was the best place to test my wheel racer, because there weren't many people or cars to get in the way. More important than that was my friends wouldn't see me wipe out if I got out of control. I had been at the cemetery so many times testing, I must have known every name on every gravestone there. I kept testing and designing and redesigning the wheel racer until I got it right. I thought I had a winner with the latest version I was testing that day. At the time I thought, if I can keep it from tipping over, which was the problem I was having at high speed, I would have no problem keeping up with my friends going down Monument Hill. My best friend was Chase Stoddard. He had a twin brother named Jeff who was in rehabilitation over at the Briarwood Training Center, but I never really hung out with him. He was kind of a brain, and we didn't have much in common other than both of us were in wheelchairs. I did like to hang out with Chase, though, who had the fastest bike in my school. I thought that if I could keep up with Chase down Monument Hill, all my other friends would want to race with me too. So I kept working on my design, and Chase was happy to help me with my testing, because he beat me every time. Chapter 2. It all started on Tuesday. As I said, I spent a lot of my free time at the Briarwood Training Center, where a lot of us with disabilities went to train for the Paralympics or the Special Olympics. Rosa, the cute girl in my science class, also trained at Briarwood on the archery range. She was the girl I wanted to impress by racing down Monument Hill with the guys. I used to watch Rosa practicing on the shooting range at Briarwood. She was amazing. She was training as an archer for the Paralympics in 1988. She hit everything she aimed at. I thought she would easily make the archery team. I hoped I could make the racing team someday too. I thought maybe we could train together. I liked her a lot, but she didn't even know I was alive. I thought if I could get the bugs worked out of my wheel racer, and Rosa heard how fast and cool I was racing down Monument Hill with the guys, then maybe she'd want to train with me at Briarwood. On Wednesday morning, May 24th, 1984, I was in science class, and it was so boring. My teacher, Mr. Toomey, was talking about the solar eclipse we were going to have later that day. During a solar eclipse, the moon passes in front of the sun, blocking out some or all of the light, making everything during the day look very eerie and strange. All I wanted to do was get out with my wheel racer and start testing on Cemetery Hill. In class, we had to make these stupid pocket-sized cardboard cutouts and stick a hole through them. This would show the moon blocking out and moving in front of the sun. The sun shines through the hole in the cardboard and reflects on your hand or whatever, so you don't look directly at the sun and hurt your eyes. Looking at the sun directly can make you go blind, so I guess it was a good idea if you cared about seeing the eclipse. Mr. Toomey said the eclipse might do some strange things to nature on that day, like affecting the tides at the beach or making animals act a little weird during the event. I thought, whatever. Man, was I in for a surprise. After school on that day, my friends rode past me on their way to ride down Monument Hill. I wanted to go too, but my wheel racer wasn't ready yet, but hopefully it would be soon. I always hated being left behind, but today I was happy to get rid of anyone who might see me test my invention, just in case I wiped out. My best friend Chase was cool though. He asked me if I wanted to hang out, but I knew he really wanted to race with the guys, so I told him I was okay and it was all right to go. The hill the guys were headed for was really steep, but Cemetery Hill where I was going was just as good for me. I had to test out my latest design where no one would see me before I could take on Monument Hill in front of everybody. If I crashed in front of everyone, I knew Nick Cavallo would tell Rosa, and she would think I was a loser. So Cemetery Hill was perfect for now. It was testing time, and I made final adjustments to the wheel racer. I transferred over to it and threw some stuff in my blue backpack, like a flashlight and a couple of snacks. I looped the backpack over the back of my racer and I was off to the cemetery. I was so excited to try out this latest design I could hardly stand it. As I sailed down the sidewalk to the cemetery, I did notice it getting a little darker. The sky had a sort of orange-gray tint to it. Then I remembered the eclipse was going to happen today. There was also a few more dogs barking in the neighborhood than usual. It all just made the day a little more fun and out of the ordinary for me. I was having a blast. I remembered I'd still had that piece of cardboard with the hole in it from class. I pulled it out of my pocket and held it up in front of me. The light shined through the tiny hole and hit my hand. I could see the moon starting to move across the front of the sun and blocking out some of the light. making what looked like a crescent moon on my hand. It was kind of cool. I guess science class wasn't that boring after all. I put it back in my pocket and raced on to the cemetery. I finally got to the top of Cemetery Hill, and I could see all the way down the road winding through the gravestones to the lighthouse below. These were the perfect testing hills, but I remembered around this one curve there were some bumps in the road that you had to watch out for. Roots from a huge oak tree had lifted up the road. After these bumps, it was smooth sailing all the way to the lighthouse. As I pushed off and headed down the hill, I started picking up speed, a lot of speed. This new design was way faster than the last time I was testing here. I really had to hold on and keep this thing from going over. My front wheel was wobbling a little, and I was still tipping as I went around my first major curve in the road. The wheel racer was holding together pretty well, but was way faster than my normal wheelchair, and I wasn't quite used to going this fast. I remember thinking I had to find a way to make it more stable at high speed. I came around another corner, and there were the bumps in the road I was expecting, so I put a little pressure on the left wheel and swerved around, missing the bumps easily. When I looked up, I saw a rabbit directly in front of me, just sitting in the middle of the road like it owned the place. I was about to run it over, so I grabbed one wheel and turned quickly off the road to avoid hitting it. Chapter 3. The Crash at Marion's Stone. As soon as I swerved off the road to miss the rabbit, I was out of control, going about 20 miles an hour over rough grass. I was weaving through the gravestones, barely missing them as I swerved first left, then right. Gravestones were everywhere, and finally I just couldn't turn fast enough to miss the one directly in front of me. I crashed into it, hitting my head on the stone and overturning my wheel racer. Everything went black and I couldn't feel anything. I started to wake up, and things were still kind of blurry. To my surprise, my head didn't hurt at all, and I felt pretty much normal, just a little groggy. I remember looking down on my shoulder as I felt a hand on it, and heard someone with an older voice say, "Are you hurt, son?" I looked up and saw an old man carrying a shovel in one hand and a lantern in the other. He was using the shovel as a cane to walk and was kind of stooped over. I thought I was going to get into trouble for crashing into the gravestone, but he didn't seem to care at all. He said his name was Bertram Colby, and that he was the caretaker of the cemetery. He picked up my wheel racer and set it upright. Thankfully, it was still in one piece. I pulled myself back up into the chair, and he asked me what my name was and what I was doing out on a night like this one. It wasn't night. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was starting to get more and more gray outside with the eclipse event that was happening, and the lantern he was carrying was getting brighter as it grew darker outside. I told him my name was Chris, and I was testing my new invention, the wheel racer. I remember he said something strange. He said, "Ah, that's what he wants with you. You're an inventor, too." Bertram was pointing at the gravestone that I had just crashed into. I looked at the stone, and it said, "Marion McCready, the keeper of the light. He never let it fail." I looked at Bertram Colby and pointed at the writing on the stone and asked, what did "he never let it fail" mean? Bertram told me that this gravestone belonged to Marion McCready and that he was the lighthouse keeper down at the bottom of the hill. Bertram went on to say it means that Marion never let the light go out in the lighthouse, and there had never been a shipwreck on the rocks in the harbor at night. Ship captains could always see Marion's light in the lighthouse tower as they rounded the point coming into the bay. He said Marion McCready was an inventor, like I was, and he had invented a chair like the one I was sitting in right now. I thought, that's kind of weird. Bertram got serious for a moment and looked up into the darkening sky and said, "Marion died on a night like this one. It was May 28th, 1900. At the time I wondered what he'd meant. Later I checked, and there was an eclipse on May 28th, 1900. I think it was just a coincidence. Maybe." I was interested in what he was saying about this lighthouse keeper, and that he had been in a wheelchair and invented things like I did back so long ago. So I followed him deeper into the cemetery. I had to dodge gravestones as he walked and talked. As we went farther into the older part of the cemetery, he pointed out the gravestones around us and said, "I know all these people." I looked around and realized we were in an area of the cemetery where people had died back in the 1800s. I thought he must be some kind of historian to have known who all these people were. It was like the whole town from that time period were all around us. He was a very interesting guy, and I liked him. I asked Bertram how the lighthouse keeper ended up in a wheelchair. He told me that on November 30th, 1834, on a day like this one, Marion was up on the light tower cleaning the lantern glass. It was in the middle of the day, and it started getting dark. He looked up at the sun that was blocked out by the moon, lost his balance, and fell from the tower. I asked Bertram how the lighthouse keeper ended up in a wheelchair. He told me that on November 30th, 1834, on a day like this one, Marion was up on the light tower cleaning the lantern glass. It was in the middle of the day, and it started getting dark. He looked up at the sun that was blocked out by the moon, lost his balance, and fell from the tower. I asked Bertram if that's what killed Marion. He said the fall didn't kill him, but he landed on some scaffolding which broke his fall, but unfortunately also broke his back, and he lost the use of his legs. I asked how a lighthouse keeper could get up and down inside that old lighthouse using a wheelchair in the 1800s. He said he invented this contraption that carried him up and down the different levels. This was back before they turned the lighthouse into a museum for tourists. After the accident, Marion wanted to keep his job as lighthouse keeper, so he invented some kind of system to make it possible. I thought, how cool was that? Marion was just like me. If you have challenges from a world not designed for you, you have to adapt and come up with things that make it work. I like this lighthouse keeper. Chapter 4. Standing on Isabel's Grave. We stopped walking, and I had rolled over a certain grave that Bertram was careful to walk around. It made Bertram very nervous by having my wheel racer sitting on top of this particular grave. His eyes opened wide, and he started shaking and rattling the lantern he was holding. As he looked at me, I could see he had terror in his eyes. "What did I do? What did I do?" I yelled. I couldn't figure out what was going on. He told me I was sitting on old Isabel Drood, a mean witch of a woman that lived in our town many years ago. I remember what Bertram said to me like it was yesterday. "You best move off of her now, boy, and quickly with ya." The way he said it sounded a little bit weird to me, but I have to admit I was getting a little freaked out, and I wasn't going to argue with him. I backed away from him because he was getting a little scary all of a sudden. When I backed up, I bumped into Isabel's gravestone. Now I want to say right here and now, her stone was already cracked when I hit it with my back wheels. The top of the stone broke off and fell to the ground. Bertram really looked scared now. He looked at me and pointed down the hill and said, "You best get yourself to the lighthouse. She'll be coming for you now, boy." I looked down at the ground when I backed away from the broken stone, because I felt a little rumble under my chair. When I looked back up, Bertram Colby was gone. I was about as alone as I could be, and right in the middle of the oldest and scariest section of the graveyard. All of a sudden this wasn't fun anymore, and I wanted out of here, and fast. I pulled hard backward with one wheel and pushed harder forward with the other, and spun my wheel racer around. I then took off as fast as I could toward the main road to get off this rough grass that was slowing me down so much. The rumbling was still coming from under Isabel's grave, and I could still hear it as I moved away from it, quickly toward the road. I wasn't watching where I was going because I was still looking for Bertram. When I looked forward again, I crashed into another stone. I got the chills. As I read the name on the stone in front of me, it said, Bertram Colby, caretaker of the county cemetery. Rest in peace, our good friend. Oh, wow. Who had I been talking to all this time? I kept thinking, wake up, you're in a dream. But this didn't feel like any dream, and something really bad was coming my way. I didn't know what to think, but I had to get off this rough grass and back to the smooth road where my wheel racer could take off down the hill fast. As I pushed my chair as hard as I could toward the road, I kept looking back at Isabel's broken gravestone. There was still rumbling coming from the ground there. So many things were happening at the same time. I saw something start to form over Isabel's grave. It was a black cloud of mist or something, but was starting to take human shape. I was really scared, and I pushed harder for the road, which was about 50 feet away. When I looked back again, whatever it was that was hovering over Isabel's grave formed into an old woman wearing a black dress with long black sleeves. She had pure white hair, and a gray wrinkled face with sunken-in eyes that were really angry. Worst of all, she was looking and pointing directly at me. She raised her arm and pointed a bony finger that looked like a claw at me. I heard her yell, "You, boy, you did this," as she started walking in my direction, fast. She was walking around the gravestones that were in her way, which gave me a little time to get to the smooth road, so I could move faster and try to get away from her. I remember I was thinking I was dead if she caught me and sank those claws into my head. I was pushing my racer over the rough grass and almost to the smooth road when my front wheel finally came loose. Thankfully it was still connected, but I wasn't going anywhere until I tightened it up.